We live in one of the most exciting times in the history of human civilization, and in a time that is pertinent to our work in the world of associations, in professional societies, trade associations, mission-driven organizations, and other kinds of membership organizations. We live in what I would broadly categorize as a social revolution, and it began with the introduction of the World Wide Web to the average worker, to the average human being in the mid-90s. When this, cool creation that was built for academia and the defense industry became available. I don't know if you can remember, but I certainly can, in 1996 when Netscape landed on the desktop and people began working together using the World Wide Web. That has spawned an evolution of social interaction that has led us to where we are today. I think it's important to have the large context because it's easy to get wrapped up in our particular location, but I want to paint it in terms of this large overarching pattern, and we can see where we are and what the work of today is. You probably know that Facebook is now clearly the leader in the social innovation space. I think it has 1.3 billion users and it's continuing to grow. As we look at how human beings relate to each other, how we learn together, how we share information, we are at a frontier. And in fact, the issues that you are identifying here in this room today articulate that frontier. And one of the things it tells us is that we're still a long way from this being something that is seamlessly sewn into the background where we just know how to do it and it's the way that the civilization works. The kinds of issues that we're dealing with, like the ones that we had in the last hot seat, where we're talking about cultural sensitivity and adaptation to an international environment, those are frontier issues that are pushing us forward. So as you look at this large, sweeping, multi-decade era in humanity where we have technology to connect us socially, and we in the leading learning space find ourselves grappling with a set of issues about how to connect people in ways that they can truly learn from each other, it creates some context around our work. It highlights the value of it, but it also lets us know that we're nowhere near the end of it, that it's a very exciting and important time to be alive and to be participating in this space. This is fundamental to who we are as a species. If you look at the work of Edward Wilson, how many people in this room know Edward Wilson? Anyone? Some people do. Edward Wilson is a Harvard University professor who got started studying ants. And he spent decades studying ants. In fact, he became the world's foremost scientist in the study of ants. And one of the things that occurred to him as he began to watch their behavior is that he began to understand that ants were not just individual creatures, but they were part of a larger superorganism that was the ant colony. And he extended his studies to looking at other species on Earth that had this social aspect. And he identified a very small number, I think it's less than 15. They make up less than 3% of the number of species on the planet, but they occupy more than 50% of the biomass of the species. In other words, physically, they take up over half the space on the surface of the Earth. And most of them are insects, but we are in that classification. Human beings are in that classification. Now, Edward Wilson's assertion that we are innately social creatures, and think association here, that we are innately social creatures created a huge division in the world of science. When he first wrote his book about our social aspects, it was at a time period when Richard Dawkins had just published the book The Selfish Gene. And what Richard Dawkins, who was kind of the premier proponent of evolution at that time, said is that genes are the primary driving force in everything human beings do. The reason that we're willing to sacrifice ourselves for our children is because the gene is perpetuated. He said that ultimately you can boil all human behavior down to those genes figuring out how to stay alive. And what Edward Wilson said is, yes, and there's another aspect of human beings, and that is our social aspect, and that we are all about keeping our tribes alive too. And that in fact, if you look at this gene versus the tribe, what you end up with is a dichotomy that creates this tension in every single human being alive. One is, should I be selfish? Should I make as much money as I can? Should I take care of my family? Should I make sure that the people in my tribe are doing well? Or should I be altruistic? Should I sacrifice myself for the greater good? Should I die for a cause? Should I give my life's energy to something that's bigger than me? And Edward Wilson said that we live in the tension between those two spaces, and that if you look in any one tribe, The one that's most successful is the one that's most selfish. But if you compare from tribe to tribe, the tribes that succeed are the ones that do a better job of altruism. And so hence we have this dichotomy that we live inside of. Now, what does this have to do with us, and what does this have to do with leading learning? We are a social animal. We share information. This breakthrough that has taken place because of the internet, because of technology, because of the spaces that you all are developing for your members is the primary space that expresses the human condition. And so there's tremendous energy for it. And what I mean by that is that you have resources, you have interest, you have passion, you have money, you have knowledge, you have expertise that are all pooling around this. And one of the places that it's pooling in a big way is in Silicon Valley. We all know LinkedIn came out of Silicon Valley. We know that all of the different Reddit, all the different social media tools and technologies that are out there came out of Silicon Valley. Well, I went there recently. I went there a couple of weeks ago. And I went expressly to begin building relationships for the CEOs that I work with in Washington, D.C. I have a practice in Washington where I work with executive directors and CEOs of associations. I have about 70 that I've worked with in the last few years, and I have another 350 that are involved with me. And several of them are involved in what we call grand challenges, really big, socially changing objectives. And so I went to Silicon Valley to begin building relationships with Apple, with Google, with Pinterest, with Yahoo, and with some startups to begin to help these associations start to play in this space. And I want to tell you about what I experienced when I was there and the relationship it has to our work today. So first of all, how many of you have spent time in Silicon Valley? Just raise your hand and look around the room. So we got about, looks like a little less than, maybe about 8 or 7% of the room. It's a really different place than Washington, D.C. I went, I took clothes like this to wear because this is what you wear in Washington. And I had, a couple of two-piece suits and some striped shirts. And the woman who was setting up my appointments for me said, this will never do. This is not good. Do you have any jeans? Do you have a T-shirt? And I kind of laughed and I thought, well, I flew over in a pair of jeans. I'll try that. Well, I ended up taking the shirt tails out of my pants and wearing dress slacks and running shoes and my dress shirts with my tails hanging out. And I felt very uncomfortable. But as I saw in my meetings, it was the way everyone was dressed, including when I met with senior executives at Apple or Google. This was the environment. And the clothes were not, of course, the only thing. It was the way that people related to each other. It was like, I was there for 3.5 days, and it was like being in a 3.5-day hackathon. I mean, every single conversation I had, people were sharing ideas. They were dreaming. They were reframing things. They were playing with each other. It was case studies. It was like promiscuous innovation. Everybody was involved in helping everybody be creative and dream and think about something together. It was decidedly different than what you experience in Washington. I know in Washington, if you have a great idea, and you go to see a trademark lawyer or an intellectual property lawyer, one of the first things they ask for is, can you sign an NDA? Nobody talked about NDAs in Silicon Valley. I mean, there's a recognition that, first of all, just sharing an idea doesn't mean you're going to be any good at executing, right? And it's like you're in an idea soup. There's not enough time to sign enough NDAs. Every single person that I spoke with had tons of ideas for me, great ideas for how I could work together with the CEOs and my executive directors, but they were also interested in their ideas, and they wanted my input, and they wanted to share what they were working on. It was really different. The environment is very much like a collective, creative ecology, but it has a sinister side to it, too. It kind of reminded me, I like science fiction, fantasy. Sometimes in a science fiction movie, there'll be like this weapon that the bad guy has that's made up of like a million tiny metallic shards that, self-organize into different kinds of robots and attack, and they learn, right? Like, so they engage in combat, they get defeated, and they learn what happened, and then they reorganize into something else. And it's usually kind of this formidable weapon that the good guys are dealing with. Well, that's what Silicon Valley is like. There's like all of these incredibly wicked smart minds, and they're constantly engaging in what they're interested in, and they're learning, and they're reorganizing, and they're in a continuous business model innovation mode. They're constantly trying things. Now, the good news is that it's open source, so you can jump into the game and play with them. But the threat is that if you're not in that space, if you're an isolated entity, and you're playing with one of these things that's made up of a million minds, that's constantly self-organizing, it'll make quick work of you. It'll take you out. Now, Silicon Valley is, you can see by the headlines with Facebook and LinkedIn and the growth of these things, but what you need to know is that Silicon Valley continues to be intensely interested in membership. One of the ways that they'll talk about membership is they'll say it's a captured target market of frictionless renewable revenue. Talk about business model innovation, right? They are interested in your members, and they are not bound by boards of directors. They are 1, 2, 3 groups of people sitting in living rooms and garages and basements asking questions like, how can we serve cardiologists in a way that the ACC is not yet doing it? How can we serve nurses in the way that the American Nurses Association is falling short? If they can get their foot in the door and they can create value, they can grow extremely fast. Some of you are probably aware of Doximity. Doximity was an app that was developed inside the American Medical Association several years ago. It grew in 3 years to a membership size that dwarfed the American Medical Association, which had been around for over 100 years. That's what these guys are interested in. That's what they want to play with. And so we need to get smart about what they're doing. We need to learn about what's going on in Silicon Valley. We can adapt it, we can play with them, but if I were going to tell you what I believe our chief weakness is, it's that we don't work together. Still, in Washington, D.C., and I'm speaking from experience of interacting with over 100 executive directors, what you see in the association world is relative isolation in stark contrast to what's happening in Silicon Valley. In Silicon Valley, you have jams, you have collaborations, you have people who are working on projects that they're not getting paid to work on because they want to be able to say, I helped write the code for the first PayPal, even though they didn't get a check and they're never going to, because it's exciting to them, because it's passionate. Now, we have passion. In fact, here in Washington, D.C., in the metro area, we probably have more centralized acumen in the professional society and trade association space than anywhere on the world. We have people who care about it, who take it to bed at night, who think about it in the shower, who come to work with new and creative ideas. So we have experience, we have knowledge, we have passion. But what we don't have is what the bees have. We don't have this constant interaction. Now, here today we have it, and over the next 2 days we have it. And thanks to the online learning environment, we can continue it. So I want to share with you 3 rules for building beehives that I learned about when I was in Silicon Valley that I hope will apply here today, and they have to do with business model innovation. The first is design first, and then figure out how to execute. I spent time with people who said to themselves, okay, all we need is a microprocessor that's 15 times faster than anything we know today. Let's just assume we have that, and then let's talk about what it could do. And then we'll figure out how to get it. Well, I can't tell you how many times I'm in associations, and when we start dreaming, the first thing that happens is people start talking about why we can't do what we're doing. Why the current model, why the current technology, why the current business processes, why the current governance limits us from going there. And I'm here to tell you that's bass-ackwards. You figure that stuff out later. First you dream, then you figure out how to do it. The second thing is that we need to break boundaries, just like we're doing here in this room. And so that means we get to know each other, and it means we dream together. And the third area is that we learn how to reframe. Instead of choosing A or B, we learn how to choose A and B. You probably know the story of Izzy Sharp, the creator of Four Seasons. He was a Canadian hotelier, and he, in the 1960s, saw 2 kinds of hotels. Small strip mall hotels that knew everybody who stayed in them and gave intense personal service, and large metropolitan hotels that provided amenities because of the scale of revenue that they were able to bring in. And he said, I want to do both. And everybody told him, you never will succeed. It's one or the other. And he built the first Four Seasons, and it did both. We need to build the first Four Seasons in the association space. We are first to market here in this area. That is a core asset that they don't have in Silicon Valley. That's what makes Coca-Cola and Pepsi stand out over your generic cola. That's what made Bob Dylan great in the folk music industry. They were first. We're first. So let's not lose our asset. Let's figure out how to break our boundaries. Let's figure out how to reframe. And while we're here, let's dream together. Thank you.